Hey, Derrell.
Hey, Jen, how you doing?
Great to have you here. I've been wanting to do this for such a long time. I've said this at CharterFolk before, but I want to start again by saying there were like 5 people in the country that I called to like give me a gut check about whether it was a wise thing to do. CharterFolk, you were one of the 5, and you were one that was most emphatic. If not you, who? Yes, do it. And you'll be there as a partner along the way. At one point, I asked you, hey, if we ever get across 10,000 contributors, will you give us a column? And you said yes. And you gave me this column just a couple weeks ago about saying it loud, and it's being talked about across the country. So for all sorts of reasons, Derrell, thank you. You've been instrumental in making CharterFolk what it is, and delighted to have you here today.
Stop it now. Stop the recording. It's only going to go downhill from there. So thank you very much. I'm really happy that you crossed the 10,000 threshold. I know it's been a labor of love and a lot of hard work, and thanks for featuring my piece. I appreciate it.
I can't wait to dive into it, but we are recording in the week after the fire started in Los Angeles. They're continuing to this very moment. It's a moment to pause and at least identify that and try to make our comments tone right out of the box. I know you've got a lot of relationships with CharterFolk in Los Angeles. Derrell, any observations you would share with folks about this?
Yeah, I mean, so for all the folks I don't have relationship with, I hope you are as safe as you can be, and that your possessions, your family, avoid as much harm or destruction as possible. Out here on the East Coast is really, really tragic. Looking at it in the same way, I can remember is before I started working in ed policy, I think it was when Katrina happened.
Yeah,
kind of like seeing the water downtown and being like, how is that ever going to be fixed? How are people ever going to recover from that? And we did, we did. So my thoughts and best wishes to Angelinos. Please be safe, and I know it's going to be better than it is now at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think that in terms of say it loud, your piece here from last week, there are all sorts of things you want to say loud in moments like this that just aren't that appropriate. And so I'll reserve some of my comments to make about the charter schools that have been affected, because they're each and every one of them is an amazing story. It's an amazing story. But the thing that strikes me at this moment is just the togetherness. I saw it in the Paradise fires. I saw it getting to know the people in Western North Carolina after the hurricane. And now we see it. There is just a spirit of togetherness and a recognition. Hey, while we have fights with each other in the public realm, in the policy realm, when it gets right down to it, people remember that we're at each other's backs. And across charters and district schools, we see people working together. And yes, within the charter school community itself, my wife's on a Facebook page with people from Odyssey Charter, and what that community did just yesterday on Facebook. I mean, I couldn't finish it without having tears in my eyes. It's amazing what they're doing, and I think the most important thing for people to realize is people are at their back. We're not gonna forget this. We're gonna keep going. You watch what we did in Paradise. You watch what we did in Western North Carolina. You watch what we see in Los Angeles. We will be at these school backs, and they will get back to being able to serve their communities like they have been able to do in the past.
Awesome.
So I wanted to dive into this piece of yours. But before that, I realized I'm not sure just how precise I've been on the Derrell Bradford origin story. we get closer in your piece. I really loved your references to seeing North Star in Newark, and then what it meant to you to be at Success Academies and to see just quality for the first time and how it galvanized you. But that's a little bit further down the road than what I think your origin is. Is there any moment at Penn, or is there any moment before perhaps, where something about this ed reform thing, or maybe charterness or whatever it is, something connected with you so deeply where you started to realize the inevitable? You were going to spend a significant chunk of your adult life working toward this. Do you have any origin moments that you point to?
Yeah, what a great question. It's hard to answer. I'm a little choked up answering it. So I am a very unlikely ed reform advocate. I was a magazine editor, like working in Manhattan. And the magazine I was working on folded in August 2001, and then 9/11 happened. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And a friend of mine from Penn was like, "Hey, my father just started this nonprofit. Maybe you can help him." And so I got a job as like the communications officer, because that was my thing, writing letters, designing websites, and all this other stuff for a state-based group in New Jersey working on school choice. So working on private school choice, working on charter schools, whatever. And I didn't know anything about education policy at the time. What I knew was that the only public school I'd ever gone to that I was zoned for was the first one. That I had an aunt who worked in the Baltimore City public school system, who basically got me into schools I never would have gotten into normally. And then I'd gone to an independent school from 7 to 12 on a scholarship. And when sort of given the mission of help families, families like mine, right, have more educational opportunity, that resonated incredibly strongly with me. So like, I'm not like a free market devotee. Like, I believe in the market, but it's like, that's not why I am the way I am, And then the first exposure I had to kind of any of this was we took a trip to Milwaukee, not to see, what was going on and kind of like with the Milwaukee Railroad Choice program, but also what the district was doing with charter schools. And so Milwaukee was a multiple authorizing environment. The district itself was an authorizer. They had this sort of kind of charter that they authorized, but kind of ran. And then they had this another kind of charter that they authorized, but didn't run. And I can remember coming back and like my instincts, and I'm very supportive of independent schools and all this other stuff.
Sure.
But I do remember thinking like, wow, this charter school thing seems like a real good idea. Like we should be doing, a lot more of that. And so I just had like two sort of like amazing mentors, two older guys, like very, seasoned in the world, one a Democrat, one a Republican. And they just gave me like a lot of care and feeding. So I've been incredibly lucky to kind of like learn about, how liberals think about opportunity, how conservatives think about it, the regulation and incentives, kind of like measurement and like, greater good, like all of these things. And if you have great colleagues and great, mentors, you wind up doing things for much longer than you anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. Was Howard in Milwaukee when you were there for that visit?
Yes, he was. And like, ironically, we're filming this on the 14th. So today is his birthday.
That's right.
That's right.
Happy birthday, Howard. That's right.
Yeah, I called him up earlier and started singing. I got to the second stanza and decided to stop. But yeah, he was hugely instrumental in my career and my thinking and everything as well. So yeah.
That's great. Well, the origin story thing is something that just keeps coming back again and again. For me, I have moments where different experiences are more resonant. But this Christmas, we had my little brother's family, my little brother from the Big Brothers program. Matthew and I met when he was 8. He's now 42.
Wow.
And his mom came for Christmas. And we just had an awesome holiday together. But I was just remembering what it was like to go with Matthew and Myron to parent-teacher conferences at his LA Unified School. My dad was a school principal, and he got himself into trouble. And the punishment he had is in Jefferson County, Colorado. He was sent to the toughest school, and that's where he spent his career. And so I was anchored to the idea that my dad's school was among the toughest you find anywhere. And then I went with Matthew and Myron to that school. And I was like, oh my gosh, my worldview is not up to date. It is not accurate. It didn't result right then in like, oh, I know what I'm going to do with my life. But I just realized a depth of unfairness that I had been blind to before. And so it's a great reason to keep long-term relationships in your life, whatever. I love them for, for all sorts of different reasons, but they also help me understand even my own experience.
Yep.
Well, talking about personal experience, I'm curious about what it was that motivated you to write Say It Loud. I mean, obviously this has been welling up in you for a while. And also I sense that it's kind of born of a moment, like maybe you're seeing others are starting to think it yourself, but I think you also know you're ahead of a curve, and maybe you're even a little bit irked by ed reformers, or more than a little bit irked. That just oozes through this piece that we're not saying it loud. But why now? What motivated you to say it at this particular point?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, the prime motivation was that you were like, yo, you told me you would write something.
Wait, Wallace being insufferable? No.
And the other thing too is just like I like music. The magazine I used to run was like an entertainment magazine, so it was a music magazine. So occasionally I title things with song titles, and Say It Loud is a James Brown song, and the second half of the line is I'm Black and I'm Proud, right? And that wasn't why I picked it. If you listen to the song, James is trying to say a hard thing out loud in a way that makes it real and acceptable, right? And so, I've been working on charters not as long as you have, but for like a long time. And maybe it's like a year ago, I was in a board meeting and just like thinking about the fact that it didn't seem like we were winning the kind of like message debate. And again, it's like, this isn't just about messaging, but I'd given a speech at a charter school and that was in the same spirit. And the principal afterwards said, that was really great to hear. We never talk about what we do like that anymore, and then I saw this quote from, I think it was Michael Bennett, and somebody said, why is it that you think, this thing and this charter school stuff and all these other things are gonna work? And he was like, given the track record of failure that we have, it's it's incumbent upon the existing system to prove that I shouldn't be trying this.
Yeah. I like that. I didn't know that. That's an interesting comment. That's great.
Right. Yeah. I have to dig it up, but it was so good. I sort of, and then, I've been working a lot on like the, no more lines, open enrollment, school zone stuff, whatever. And when you explore the history of that, and it's so like obviously intertwined in like school zoning, school finance, how we assign teachers, all this other stuff, I was like, what the fuck are we afraid of? I'm sorry to say it like that, but it was just like, I'm in these meetings and I'm trying to explain to people why charter school kids deserve, the money that they get. And it's like, and I'm dancing around all of it. And people are saying, like they're giving me all these reasons why charter schools, are a problem. And like, we just completely allied the hardwired, challenges of the traditional district system. And I was like, we just need to talk about this very differently and frankly. And like part of it, I think, is a little bit of a challenge to us because like, look, you have a new idea, you're trying to sell people on it. Of course, you make concessions in how you talk about it, which are reflective of how of what you're trying to get accomplished, and that's kind of like the school finance thing. At the same time, like you're set up to be different than something.
Right.
And you got to be proud of the difference. I mean, that's again, like, let's go back to the James Brown joint, right? He wasn't like, I'm kind of proud of it. He's like, I'm really proud of it, So I I was in a board meeting like a year ago thinking about this stuff and been kind of like whispering it a little bit since then. And this was like a nice chance to kind of kick it out there. And I'm happy to see how the discussion goes from here on forward.
Yeah, I think this need to say it loud is so prevalent. And I also have just felt so much concern about our unwillingness to say the things that need to be said. And so many of the posts that I encourage people to write, or I try to write myself, are really in that vein, what is it that needs to be said right now? But I feel like yours did as good a job as any I'm familiar with the 5 years of doing this work. So which is just great. And I feel as though, our world is sometimes convinced that the right thing to say is the least controversial thing to say.
That's right.
If we said something that's controversial, then we're doing something wrong.
Right.
And I just think that we need to revisit that. We want to stimulate discussion, debate, argument, strong feelings. And if our advocacy isn't doing that, most likely it's a function of us compromising to such a level that we're not playing the role that society should expect of us.
Yeah, what's his name? Ursula K. Le Guin wrote this book called A Wizard of Earthsea.
Yeah.
It's a fun book. And in the world of Earthsea, the way you have power over things is to be able to know their true name. So
right.
I just like highlight that, not just because I'm a science fiction geek, but because you have to like name the thing to get what you want, right? So if you're like, well, I support, a parent's right to choose a charter school, then you have to support the right for the money to flow, right? I mean, these are the same thing, if you support the right of, a school to be different, then you have to support difference.
Right.
These kinds of things, and they're so obvious, and they sort of like loop in on one another. But I do feel like these things have become controversial over time. And like so for instance, I've been in Newark forever, or worked in Newark forever. And then 5 or 6 years ago, this argument used to come up that was like, well, the charter schools in Newark don't look like the district schools in Newark. And I was like, okay, so there's no school in Newark that looks like the district, right? The district is an average. Right. So let's talk about math first, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing I was like, well, look, we have a bunch of schools that you get based on where you live, and then we have a bunch of schools that you get based on whether or not you want to be there. Those two things are so wildly different in terms of what motivates people to go. Of course, they're going to look different.
Totally.
But we're like running backwards, blowing kisses about this and trying to explain it away. Like that's the kind of thing where it's like, the nature of the thing is to look this way. You have to embrace that. You can't, run away from that.
You've got to say it loud. I think Newark is one of our most interesting learning opportunities. I've written about Indianapolis. I contrast now Indianapolis and Newark, because I almost contrast Newark and Camden. Because Newark is going in a different direction, which is the only way they can hold on to their enrollment is through these selective admissions and magnets. I think it's one thing when you've got selective admission magnets that have been open since 1910, and people will blubber and cry and throw a fit if they get rid of the selective admission that their grandfather attended. All right, that's one thing. A whole other thing is, no, we're going to make new ones right now.
That's right.
And we're going to make schools that a lot of kids can't get into. And we're going to force them to go back to schools. And we're going to suck money away from their schools to subsidize the schools that they're not allowed into. And we sit there and we will not say it loud.
Yeah. I mean, look.
When we won't say it there, where will we say it, Derrell?
You're getting at something that I think it's the other side of the coin on this, right? So I've argued this. Well, argued implies I've done it loud. But I have said to people, it's like, look, sometimes you got to lean into your strengths. And I know there are plenty of, like neighborhood schools out there that, district run that are doing fine, right? Yeah. But a lot of my experience has featured school districts who only get better by being more selective. So, and there's two ways that you're normally selective. You draw a more exclusive attendance zone that is richer or more segregated, right? Or you make a magnet. And so to me, I'm like it would be a provocative discussion to be like, okay, so maybe that's what districts should do. and get out of the, like we serve all kids game, which isn't real, right? Which I think we know isn't real. And let other actors be like, all right, well, we're the school for X, or like we're the school that closes this gap, or we're the school that doesn't care how rich your parents are, or we're the school that doesn't care if you sing particularly well, whatever. Like that's a very, again, like provocative prompt for the future of district schools.
Right.
But don't do it undercover and then try
Right.
to clown the charter guys and be like, yo, you're taking all the good kids. That doesn't work either.
Well, predictably, Derrell, you're taking this in a pathway I hadn't foreseen at the beginning of the conversation. So I'll go with this because I've got a couple of questions I want to get to. But your comment in the piece about the money, talking about the money, I feel like we shy away from talking about the money generally.
Yeah.
And actually, the money is an opportunity for us. In Chicago public schools right now, I think, the national example of disaster.
100%.
What are the central bureaucracy is taking money away from schools that parents want to send their kids to and subsidizing schools that parents don't want to send their kids to. Yeah. And there are all sorts of things in most states in the country. Charter schools have to approve their budgets down to the school level and get audits down to the school level. I think that we win when we go on offense. We say it loud to Brandon Johnson and the crowd there in Chicago. Show us the money. Show us a budget down to the school level like we do. Get audits down to the school level. And then when you're sucking thousands and thousands of dollars away from schools that parents want to send their kids to, deal with their ire at that point. And the other piece we should be doing is for schools that are having money sucked away from them, we should give them a lifeline. Please come, convert yourself to charter school status, take control of your destiny. But because we can't talk about the money, right? We can't talk about the money, then we can't address the foundational issue. It's just another reason why I'm just super excited about what you wrote last week.
Jed, on the one hand, right? Every kid in America who chooses a charter school becomes a second-class citizen of school finance, right? Yeah. So that's on the one side. And there's an argument to be made that, like, look, we have a reverse weighted student formula based on what you choose, right? So
reverse weighted, I like that.
You choose charter school, you get less. You choose private school, you get less. You do all of these things, right? But think about how we're rationalizing what you just raised. Yeah. The CTU in Chicago wants the city to take a rent-a-center style payday loan to give them a raise, right, that they don't deserve in a district with like 30% proficiency? And meanwhile, everybody that can get out, beg, borrow, steal, lie, whatever, is doing it. I mean, it's outrageous. So like, I'm over here and it's like, yo, Chicago Charter School X, I really don't want to speak up and say, hey, the extra $5,000 that we don't get because you can bond and you get local property taxes or whatever it is. Oh, we'd really love to have like $500 of that. While over here, it's like, no. The whole city needs to go deep into debt, right? Like in a way that is completely irrational and irresponsible, so we can get ours, right?
Right.
and they're saying it loud, right? They are saying it loud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been told many, many times, Jen, will you stop talking about the governance model? People don't care about the governance model. Parents don't care if it's a charter or non-charter. And it's all true to some extent. But when we don't talk about governance, when we don't say that school districts, by definition, are not accountable. If they go under, the state must bail them out.
Yeah.
A nonprofit, if it goes under, it goes away. Yeah. And so, of course, the accountable entity makes decisions that are very different from the ones that's not. So, yes, talking about money actually matters. And if we talk about money in the right way, reflecting our values, I believe we will prevail in the public realm. Same thing around governance too, but we're not doing it. And again, why it's so important that you wrote your piece last week.
I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and I just want to be clear. I think we need to talk about the money because I think kids in charter schools deserve all of the money. Right?
Totally. Absolutely.
But we were having a conversation kind of about like agenda setting, like in particular agenda setting for Democrats in education policy. And I was just kind of like, maybe you shouldn't jump immediately to the policies, right? There's some things just like, Democrats should support charter schools because Democrats go to charter schools, right? I mean, like that's
Okay.
should be a no-brainer. But I was like, I ran a session at like the Black and Hispanic Caucus weekend in Albany, like 5 or 6 years ago. And there was a guy there, an assemblyman from the Bronx, very supportive of charter schools. There's a lot of charter schools in the Bronx, some of the best in the world, whatever. And he was saying, every year I vote to spend more money on public education in New York State. But the schools in my district still don't have chalk. And so I was kind of like, hey, like this is a higher order question,
Right.
About, to your point, about how the systems are organized to do their jobs. If you can, in New York State, when we say, oh, you're adding more money, we're talking about adding billions all the time, right?
Yeah.
This isn't like incremental money. Like it doesn't fit in a wheelbarrow, right? I mean, you got to like have a couple of trucks to roll it around, basically, right? And I'm like, how is it that you can put a couple of $1 billion in the top and there's no chalk at the bottom? That is not something that happens in a charter school, right? Like at least not in the main. And if it did happen, that school goes away, right? Or there's such a public outcry about it, the temperature gets turned up. There's going to be an inquisition, right? Like somebody, Torquemada is going to get on somebody, about this. And so these things, like they are unique and important about charter schools. And the fact that we can do them in charter schools means we can do them elsewhere. And it's like, I wouldn't even know how to answer this without being like flip or an asshole about it. I know there's a tremendous injustice being done to the teachers expecting raises, to the kids who want chalk, to the people who need to paint walls and fix ceilings and all this other kind of stuff, all legitimate concerns that happen when you put $1 billion in the top and you can't get chalk at the bottom.
Right. Well, I think that, just continuing to say what needs to be said here, I think is super important. And another area that you've been bringing up here is this free, public, open to all. And do you mind? I just got a text this morning. I wouldn't do this, but this comes from CharterFolk board member Jim Gunner. He is familiar with the new authorizing playbook. What do they call it? The authorizing benchmarks approved by the state of Arkansas. At the top of that very long document, they have a quote by one Jed Wallace. And here's what it says: let's not define ourselves by the similarities we share with other public schools, but rather by the unique characteristics, movement, and processes that make charter schools distinct and innovative. If we fail to embrace and uphold what sets us apart, we risk turning the floor into the ceiling. Charter schools are intentionally different by design. Let's honor and build upon that distinction. Now, frankly, I had forgotten that I had even written that thing. I had to go back and remember exactly what the context was.
I hate to say it, I stole your stuff. I didn't even. I feel like I was quoting you.
Well, what the similarities between there and and what you wrote here? It's just like, hey, look, yes, free, public, and open to all. We want to reinforce that we are public schools.
Yeah.
But the number of schools, I really think one of the most important things we could do is get every charter school organization to get the word charter back into its name. Like, we're afraid of it, we're ashamed of it, whatever. Whenever people say, what's a charter school? I'm fine if they say, I don't know, but it's whatever Harmony is. I don't know, but it's whatever Rocket Ship is, right?
Yeah.
But we've taken it out, and you really tapped into this as well. What additional nuance would you offer in this area?
No, I mean, it's like, I'm a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and there's this great part in Full Metal Jacket where R. Lee Army and Matthew Modine are talking about Christmas. I'll try to leave it as secular as possible. And in the end, he goes, "Look, I know if I change my my answer, you're only going to beat me harder." And I feel like this has been the thing, right? Which like,
I love that.
Yeah, like a lot of and I maybe there's an insight about this, but it's like, a lot of like really well-meaning, very capable people who are in charter world think that the closer we come to presenting ourselves as coterminous, part of the same family, whatever, like there are lots of different ways to think about it, to traditional public schools, the more accepted we will be by traditional public schools.
Right.
Right. And so, one, I don't think traditional public schools are the audience. Families are, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you define your audience as traditional public schools, you're going to behave one way. If you define it as families, you're going to behave another. So, that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is that doing so does not seem to have mollified the people who don't like charter schools.
Exactly.
So if I was rolling up to the NEA headquarters and they're, "Oh, Derrell, we're so happy to have you! Charter schools are great!" If that was happening, I might be like, "Oh yeah, let's do something different." But that's not happening, right? And so I don't think it's hard to say out loud that there are different kinds of public schools. And I'm very supportive of magnet schools. You don't hear magnet school people running around talking about public magnet. They just say, "I'm a magnet," like I'm a arts magnet. They talk about what they are, not where they're from or like how they're governed or whatever. And I remember telling a kid, it's like, one of our fellows, he was like, "What exactly is a charter school?" And I was like, "It's a public school that's not run by a district." And then like that just seems so easy and simple. So I'm proud of the fact that nonprofit governance, authorizers, parent choice, and dollars follow the child, have created an environment where kids and families can match their hopes and dreams with what independent and aspirational people in charter world feel like they can do to deliver that.
Yeah.
That's magic right there.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to be ashamed of about that. Like we should be, we should say it loud. Like we should be singing about that from the, from the mountaintops.
Well, I've been talking about Dems. You brought up Dems just a couple minutes ago. I wanted to ask on that as well. But people don't need to hear from me on this. I'm ad nauseum. I've been writing about what's going on with Dems. But share your observations. We're in this moment where Dems are considering again. Ezra Klein at the New York Times says that the Democratic Party is at risk of becoming known to be the defenders of that which doesn't work, and public education is clearly, within that, right? And he's pissed off. They need to change such that they can be defenders of things that work. But what exactly that translates into, I think a lot of it comes down to us. How good is our advocacy? And are we going to draw people in our direction? But what are you seeing from your perch at 50 Can?
Yeah, just like, it's pretty good policy to support things. It's pretty good politics to support things that people like. It's pretty bad politics to support things that people don't like, right? And so you can look at any poll and anybody, like basically everybody except the richest white progressives in the most exclusive school zones are like, "I like this public school choice thing. I like this charter school thing. That's good. We should have more public schools of choice, of all kinds, right? But yeah, I'm down with the charter school thing." In New Mexico, it's like our polling there is through the roof. Like people are like, we want more of this, right? And so
Matt was sharing that with me. It's amazing.
Yeah, you look at the Chuck Todd in the rubble of the November elections, and people don't notice about me. I vote in Democratic primaries, right? I know I'm kind of a wild card, but I do that, right? And so and always have done that. He was like, "Look, if you're trying to find out why so many Hispanic families in Texas basically have gone the other way, they like school choice, right? Like there are 80,000 more kids in charter schools in Texas over the last 5 years. You're running on killing these things. They're like, why are you going to take my school away? So I just think on the one hand, like the practical, implications of embracing charter schools as a way to build constituency is a no-brainer. And honestly, Republicans have figured this out, right? They figured out the more, like, when we give families what they want, they get on board. Look at Arizona, right? Look at Arkansas, where they did ESAs and raised the charter cap at the same time, eliminated the charter cap at the same time, like that kind of stuff. So I don't think there's a downside to that. Here's the other part of this, and I'm going to be more like acerbic about it here. I think I just used that the right way. So, and I'll put my cards on the table. I remember in the spring of 2020, I was in Georgia. I had just given the Charter Schools Association's speech on that Friday the 13th before the world ended, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, close it all down. I always sort of say this, right? So people know where I was. And then by August, I was kind of like, oh man, this is all political. I'm like, because there was stuff going on in the rest of the world, and people were opening schools and whatever. And then, like, my view on, like, our position was kind of like, if you want in person, you should be able to get it, right? So I just got to throw that out there. But I think the Democrats made like a really bad bet in 2020. The bet was, we're going to let you keep schools closed longer than we should as a way to ratchet pressure up on Trump so we can oust him. And the payback for that is going to be $190 billion. You can spend it on recurring expenses, even though it's non-recurring, because after Trump is gone and we run the table, we're just going to put more of it on the federal balance sheet, right? And the cost of that has been outrageous for kids, right? Like, the learning loss is basically locked in. It's really bad. And the Democrats have sort of abdicated their education agenda along the way. The problem with this bet is that it has failed spectacularly.
Totally.
In every way. And not only do we have the trifecta at the congressional level now, but the entire country is more conservative than it was eight years ago, basically, right? And so if you're a Democratic, leader, you got to be like, when I'm standing next to these people, what do I get? Versus when I'm standing next to these people, what do I get? And it's, look, 50 can, we're half in blue states, half in red states. Like, our secret sauce is that we want to be able to win no matter who is in charge.
Yeah.
So that is our stance. But if you're a partisan, you got to be like this is all downside.
Yeah, totally.
So maybe we should revisit the whole conversations. And look, maybe it's not ESAs or whatever, but how can it not be charters? Minimum,
Yeah. I mean, I think that this relates to say it loud, frankly. We know that the Democrats have the constituency of the teachers unions and other public employee unions. And I think we're also at a moment where many people are realizing that the control of the Democratic Party from that constituency is running the risk of the entire Democratic Party being unelectable.
I agree.
And so I think one thing that we could do is have please come with new policy proposals. That's why I think your work on red lines and some of these issues around money, I think they actually matter. And I think we can actually win in the public realm as it relates to that. But a part of this also is that we must attach those that want to protect the status quo to the tragedy that is emerging within the status quo. And that requires us to say loud that what is happening in those places is just terribly unacceptable. And until we get to the point where we can say that, this evolution of Democratic Party politics just ain't going to happen.
Yeah, you hit on two super important things. One of the things I've observed, particularly after the pandemic, is that so many people were sort of hurt, disaffected, or whatever, that people don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like déclassé to bring it up, and so that's why I keep bringing it up. because you can't let these sort of, what's the word? It was like a point of high fault. Like stay in the system, right? So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is that not talking about it, and I think you see this in how states have held their data longer than they should, or lowered cut scores when nobody was looking.
Exactly.
This kind of stuff. now there's kind of like this postmodern take to just get everybody around a new lower normal that doesn't send up a red flag, or that doesn't alarm anyone. And that ain't good either, right? And so, I do think we need to get back to a place of, like caring about what happened.
Right.
I got to laugh to keep from crying, because it's like, like Democrats in particular, right? It's supposed to be the party of data. And the fact that, New York says, oh, you get your test scores when you get them. Yeah. And that the regents, don't matter anymore. Like, I mean, how is that like, and nobody talks about it, right? Like the governor doesn't talk about it, like you're lucky we got a little bit of science of reading going on, but like, it's just it's not even there. So yeah, I'm very much aboard the idea that like, you can't be different than something if you can't compare it to something.
Right.
And not talking about it doesn't give you something to compare it to.
Absolutely. Well, I think that I describe what's going on in the Democratic Party or in the Democratic world as gray divorce, knowing friends in the 50s and 60s that are splitting up. Oh my God. And fortunately, my wife seems to be able to put up with me so far. But, gray divorce is a reality. And I believe that there's gray divorce happening in the Democratic Party on education issues. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, I consider it the honeymoon period, the infatuation period. They're super excited about these ESA and voucher programs, and they're not really looking at the faults that are there within their partner that a year or two into their relationship, they're ultimately going to have to contend with. The question I have for you, Derrell, is how wise is it, if at all, for us to point out that there are some issues in this infatuation relationship that they have that they may want to be getting ready for? Or is it best just let them, they're going to emerge anyway, let them learn them in their own sweet time, and let's keep it conversations around our values so we know what to propose when the Republicans are ready to fix some of these faults in their new system here?
Yeah, it's two great questions. So I will say that, believe it or not, even among people who are very supportive of ESAs and these other things, we too are like, you got to be ready for the fallout, right? Or challenges or new things or whatever. Because, and I just want to say this, it's like, an ESA is not like a voucher, right? An ESA is a revolution in school finance that enables lots of things, right? A voucher is like gets you a seat somewhere, and so that is so new that it's its own thing. And so I don't think charter leaders need to elbow drop ESAs or whatever. I know you and I have talked about this. I frankly think that charter schools have a real role to play in ESA world, offering courses and enrichment and a whole bunch of other stuff as a provider. I think the ESA opportunity lowers the cost to try for an existing charter school that's like, oh, we have this new idea and a classroom. Maybe the 10 families want to come in, we can try it out together, that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot there. The more important thing I just think is that like, this is a moment, particularly for charter school people, to revisit some of the things that I kind of talk about in my piece, right? So if the temperature for change, because Republicans support charter schools, but they support other kinds of choice too. Yeah. If the temperature for change is so hot that people are like, yeah, we're just gonna write some checks. Yeah. Right? We're gonna give families money and see what they do. Then certainly a conversation about like, well, why doesn't local property tax wealth follow a kid to a charter school? Or why do we have this prohibition on facilities funding, or any of these other things? Or like, why do I have to submit purchase orders for stuff the way the district does when I'm supposed to be out from under all this stuff? Why does my principal need this kind of certification, instead of whatever? Like we should be going in and asking for all that stuff too. For sure. If not just because, hey, we want to compete, or hey, the continuum is broader between monopoly and market now because there's other things there. if not now, when?
Totally. Well, I wrote this morning about the time has come for the charter school movement to plant its feet. Andy was encouraging me to write that one. But I also think there's a different, planting our feet, I think, is having a more creative, expansive policy agenda that reflects our values, proactively asserted, not done at the last second when somebody else is choosing the moment and the context and all that stuff. But I think that there's also a difference between planting your feet and stamping your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways for us to be just petulant or just not politically savvy, doing it at the wrong time. And this is one of the things I think Starlee is actually very spot on to right now.
Yeah.
And I think we would benefit from listening to her. And it may not be the time for us to stamp our feet, but if we avoid stamping our feet, we may be able to plant our feet longer term in ways that I think our entire movement will end up feeling proud of in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Starlee's great, and I'm very happy to get to work with her and support her, and her political acumen are unique, and I think obviously Texas is Texas, but it doesn't happen, for nothing, right? So I just, kind of two things. On the one hand, this is a great example. So if you are a charter school supporter in Texas, just like Louisiana last year, whatever, where the governor is like, hey, we're doing this ESA thing or whatever, the worst thing you can do is tell the governor he's wrong, right? So so maybe plant your feet, in that one. At the same time, I feel like this has been hard, because this was like a hypothesis of earlier on. It predates me, but certainly I know you know it. Look, it makes common sense that if you come up with a school that rights a historic wrong and closes achievement gaps so low-income kids of color, so they can go on to be the best version of themselves, that the politics should just line up behind that, right? That's logical.
Right.
And unfortunately, that logical premise has not held itself out in the way that I think we want it to,
Right.
And so now, like, the stamping your feet is being political, because there's a point where you can try to convince people, and if they don't want to be convinced, you have to change them.
Yep.
And I think that too is another kind of like culture change among charter supporters and charter leaders and charter families and whatever. You want people who support you, and who support the time and effort you are putting into your kids so they can become, the person you want them to be. And that too is an evolution. And I think there are lots of state charter associations, and certainly the Alliance, that are moving in that direction.
Well, Derrell, this has gone in very different direction than what I was anticipating. And when I sent you an outline, we've just gone all over the place. But let me just try to wrap things up by putting two questions in front of you that I wanted to get to. The first, I'd love to hear your thoughts about 50CAN.
Yeah.
And you're on the board of the National Alliance,
mm-hmm.
and yet you're a senior executive, president at 50CAN. How do you see these organizations, or how do you think the overall architecture of advocacy for charter schools and reform should fit together? Seems like I wrote today, I'm really excited that Starlee is creating a C4 at the national organization. She's getting tighter relationships with the associations. I think those association relationships is a spine upon which we can build all sorts of strength, but we can't do it all ourselves.
Yeah.
And yet also, though, we've seen a lot of other advocacy organizations come and go, and the impermanence and the change has been counterproductive. How does 50CAN fit in here in a long-term way, such that we build our collective strength for the long term?
Yeah. So, so the first thing is that, like, and this is going to sound like a McKinsey consultant thing, but it's not. Like, no duplication. And when I say no duplication, I mean know and respect each other's strengths and expertise. And so, education is the state game. We have 10 state campaigns. I don't know a tenth of what our 10 state campaigns know in their states, because I'm not in them, right? And so, so I can push on goals and everything else, but at some point I got to be like, all right, well, you're there. Like, what is the thing, right? And so with the Alliance and states and their relationships, complementary and not duplicative, right? So I think that's an important framing. And our relationships, meaning 50 CAN chapters across the country with charter champions and the Alliance and CSAs, whatever, is the same way. Like there are some states where we are much better deployed on the political side. And so it's like, so we're working in coalition with the National Alliance and the local CSA and other people, and we're recruiting candidates, on our C4 side of the 50 CAN Action Fund, and doing mailers and doing stuff that those guys don't want to have to do.
Right.
So we're doing that, and then there are other places where we have better grassroots, and we're helping charter schools organize their parents and motivate their parents and understand the issues and show up at the state house, and somebody else is running independent expenditures or and those kinds of things. And none of us basically are working at the federal level, right? Because there's somebody doing that. But if we got a call in Georgia that said, Congressman X needs to be convinced, we could do that kind of thing. So this sort of collaboration, I think, is vital, not just because it's more efficient, right? But because in a universe where to your point, you need organizations with longevity that send a message that we're not a flash in the pan, that we're a movement that can be here and support you over a long period of time, as teachers unions do. Right. Then the whole thing works. Like funders are like, all right, I'm part of something bigger than me. Electeds are like, hey, these guys aren't going to give me money. I take a risk and they go away. And more importantly, we don't get our wires crossed at the local level where like the wrong mailer goes out and, the speaker says, no, you're not from me, anymore, which is a kind of thing that can happen. So.
Right. Well, I think that longevity and permanence is so important. And I think it's why I believe political and advocacy endowments for advocacy organizations are so important. And I've been talking about this for a long time. I did have a very key friend come up to me at some point and say, Jed, you've got to stop talking about political endowments. Your state associations and the National Alliance's governance is not seen as strong enough to be a good steward of that volume of resources. You're basically asking donors to give $1 billion to a frat house. That makes no sense. Shut up. Don't say it loud. But that's one where I've said, I hear you. But I'm going to keep saying this loud because there is no answer here. We must have permanence. And when we can project permanence on our C4 side, but also for an organization like 50 CAN, we can project permanence such that we can be in partnership with our state association long enough to get better at it over time. Yeah. This is where the success really happens. So you're being involved with both. It's just so important. And you find yourself right in the perfect place to say it loud over and over again. Okay, let me ask this last question. This was supposed to be like early on. This. You're probably like, Wallace, where's it coming? When's it coming? I believe that your comment is of a moment. It is of a moment. I don't think this could have been written 2 years ago or 4 years ago. Maybe it should have been, but I also feel the reason it's resonating with our community is we can see it. We can recognize how spot on it is. And it's making me think we're like Zuckerberg, on his pivot, on free speech and all this stuff. And it's possible to look at Zuckerberg and say, oh, it's all one cynical political ploy and all that kind of stuff. But when I listen to him, I actually am fairly convinced that he's returning to first principles. And he just feels more comfortable talking about it in that way. And he knows that's where Meta should be for the long term. I'm getting a sense that the charter school world is coming through a moment where we've been perhaps excessively apologetic, where we've been excessively silent, excessively ambivalent, and we're recognizing it now. And I can't wait to see what's going to be on the other side of our Zuckerberg moment. But tell me if I'm wrong here. Do you see something comparable?
No, so I think that's a great analysis. I'm trying to remember what the term is he uses for it. But Todd Rose talks about this too. And it's, people are social. And the loudest voices can change how we perceive our realities in ways that are outsized given to the power that the voice commands.
Mm.
And so what I think you're seeing with Zuckerberg right now, even though it is a return to first principles, it is really a lagging indicator, right? The quietly, many of us feel like you can't say what you want to say. And what we've all been waiting for is for somebody to stand up and be like, that's a problem. And then when somebody does it, everybody's like, oh shit, I feel that way. I feel the same way, right? And so it's not that it's not brave or self-interested or any of these things. What it is wildly timely and precisely in line with what the kind of gestalt is, but nobody's saying it out loud, right? And I think the charter thing, again, it's like, it's all well-intentioned. Like a lot of this stuff starts from the best place, right? You're like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Well, blah, 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 blah. And over time, so much sort of friction is accreted that all that can happen is that it is an explosion, And so I feel like, the charter stuff's in the same place. I don't, clearly, given your quote in the Arkansas thing, I don't manifest these ideas on my own, right? Unless you get them from osmosis, But I do know that like this movement is filled with free spirits who want to try new things and do new things. And that has not been the temperature for the last couple of years. And that doesn't just, these people, they don't just not become who they are. Just like I'm not waking up tomorrow with hair. It's not happening. So I just, I'm excited. Like, I feel like the political landscape has changed substantially. I feel like there's a greater opportunity to try new things, or for risk or whatever. And along with that is a chance to remember who we were at our best, and not apologize for the best things that we've done.
Well, almost immediately before getting on this call, I had another call with a very respected leader in the country who has a big speech to make this week. And this person read your piece and decided to tear up what he had previously written. And he wanted it to be his version of Say It Loud. So, Derrell, it's just, you're a treasure for our movement. You're a treasure for our movement. You're a treasure for all of us. And you've been a treasure for CharterFolk at different points. And don't be surprised. I mean, I'm insufferable. I'll wait until it's another major milestone. I don't know if it's 25,000 or 40,000 or whatever it is. But when there is a moment that requires that special insight and that special passion, I'm always going to be turning back to Derrell Bradford. So thank you so much for being a part of this today, and look forward to continuing to make all sorts of mischief together going forward.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, Jed. I appreciate it.
Oh, I know.